The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the convoy as it moved through the narrow mountain pass in Afghanistan's Helmand province. Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her medical pack for the 100th time that morning, her eyes constantly scanning the rocky terrain ahead. At 28, she had already served 3 tours as a Navy corpsman, but this mission felt different. The intelligence reports had been vague, mentioning only a high-value target and the need for immediate medical support. Beside her in the armored vehicle sat Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, a seasoned SEAL with 15 years of combat experience. His weathered face showed no emotion as he checked his weapon for what seemed like the 5th time in 10 minutes. The team of 8 elite operators had been briefed on a simple extraction mission, but Morrison's instincts told him otherwise. Something about the urgency in their commanding officer's voice during the pre-mission briefing had set off alarm bells. Maria had earned her place among these warriors through sheer determination and skill. Growing up in a small Texas border town, she had watched her father struggle with injuries from his time in Vietnam, injuries that the local VA hospital seemed unable or unwilling to properly treat. That experience had driven her to pursue medicine and eventually led her to enlist in the Navy. Her rapid rise through the ranks as a corpsman had caught the attention of Special Operations Command, and soon she found herself attached to SEAL teams on their most dangerous missions. The convoy suddenly lurched to a halt as the lead vehicle's commander raised his fist in the air. Through her headset, Maria heard the terse communication from the point team. They had reached the objective, a small village nestled in a valley where their target was supposedly hiding. But as the team dismounted and began their approach, something felt terribly wrong. The village was too quiet. No children playing in the dusty streets. No women hanging laundry. No men sitting in the shade, drinking tea. Even the dogs that usually roamed freely through Afghan villages were nowhere to be seen. Morrison caught Maria's eye and gave her a slight nod. They both sensed the trap closing around them. As they moved through the narrow alleyways, following predetermined routes to their objective building, the first shots rang out. The crack of AK-47 fire echoed off the mud brick walls, followed immediately by the distinctive sound of American weapons returning fire. Maria dropped low behind a crumbling wall, her medical training taking over as she assessed the tactical situation while preparing for casualties. The firefight erupted with sudden violence that even these experienced warriors found overwhelming. The enemy had prepared well, positioning fighters in elevated positions throughout the village. What should have been a quick extraction had become a prolonged battle for survival. Within minutes, Maria heard the dreaded call over the radio that every corpsman fears most. "Corpsman up, we've got wounded." Without hesitation, she sprinted across the open courtyard toward the voice, her medical bag bouncing against her hip. Bullets whizzed past her head as she reached Petty Officer First Class Danny Chen, who was lying behind a low stone wall with blood seeping through his uniform. A round had caught him in the shoulder, and from the way he was breathing, Maria suspected possible internal injuries. As she worked to stabilize Chen, applying pressure bandages and starting an IV line under fire, she noticed something that would later prove significant. Among the enemy fighters, she caught glimpses of uniforms and equipment that didn't match the typical Taliban or Al-Qaeda gear they usually encountered. Some wore newer tactical vests, carried advanced communication equipment, and moved with a level of coordination that suggested professional military training. The battle raged for over an hour as the SEAL team found themselves pinned down in multiple locations throughout the village. Maria moved between wounded teammates with a calm efficiency that impressed even these hardened veterans. She had already treated 3 wounded operators when Morrison's voice crackled over her headset with urgency she had never heard from him before. "Rodriguez, we need you at Building 7 immediately. We've got multiple casualties and something else you need to see." Fighting her way through enemy fire with 2 other SEALs providing cover, Maria reached the building Morrison had indicated. Inside, she found not only 2 more wounded teammates but also something that would change everything they thought they knew about this mission. In the back room of the building lay a wounded enemy fighter. But this one was different from the others they had encountered. The man appeared to be European, possibly Russian, based on his features and the few words he mumbled in what sounded like accented English. His equipment was military grade, but bore no identifying marks or flags. Most disturbing of all were the documents scattered around him, written in what appeared to be a mixture of languages, including English, Russian, and Arabic. As Maria worked to treat the man's wounds, Professional ethics overriding any personal feelings about treating an enemy combatant. She noticed something that made her blood run cold. Among the scattered papers was a photograph, and in that photograph was a face she recognized immediately. It was her own face, along with what appeared to be detailed information about her background, her family in Texas, and even her father's medical records from the VA hospital. Morrison saw her expression change as she stared at the photograph. "What is it, Doc?" Before Maria could answer, the wounded foreign fighter grabbed her wrist with surprising strength for someone who had lost significant blood. His eyes locked onto hers as he whispered in heavily accented English, "They know who you are, Maria Rodriguez. They know about your father. They know about the hospital records he accessed. They know what he found." The words sent a chill through Maria that had nothing to do with the desert evening air that was beginning to seep into the building. Her father had died 2 years earlier. But in his final months, he had become obsessed with researching his own medical treatment and that of other veterans at their local VA facility. He had claimed to have discovered something important, something that people were trying to cover up. But Maria had dismissed his concerns as the paranoid ravings of a man whose mind was being affected by his medications. Now, as she looked down at this foreign operative who somehow knew intimate details about her family, she began to realize that her father's paranoia might have been justified. The man's grip on her wrist loosened as he lost consciousness. But his words continued to echo in her mind. How did a foreign operative in the mountains of Afghanistan know about her father's research into VA medical records? What had her father discovered that was important enough for someone to track her down on the other side of the world? Morrison was studying the documents scattered around the room with growing concern. Most were written in languages he couldn't read, but there were enough English phrases and technical terms to suggest that this mission had been compromised from the beginning. Someone had known they were coming, had known exactly which route they would take, and had prepared accordingly. As Maria finished treating the wounded fighter, she noticed something else that sent another wave of fear through her system. Pinned to the man's vest was a small device she didn't recognize, but Morrison's sharp intake of breath told her he knew exactly what it was. "That's a GPS tracker," he said grimly, "and it's been broadcasting our position for the past 6 hours." The realization hit them both at the same time. This hadn't been a simple ambush, or even a well-planned trap. Someone had been tracking their movements since before they left base, had known exactly where they would be and when they would arrive. The mission had been compromised from the very beginning, and Maria was beginning to understand that she might be the reason why. As night fell over the village and the fighting began to die down, Maria found herself staring at the photograph of her own face in the hands of a foreign operative. Whatever her father had discovered in those VA medical records, it was apparently important enough for someone to orchestrate an elaborate trap in the mountains of Afghanistan. And now she was trapped in the middle of something much larger and more dangerous than a simple military operation. The questions multiplied in her mind as she continued to treat wounded teammates through the long night. Who had sent this foreign team? What had her father really discovered? And most importantly, how many people were willing to kill to keep whatever secrets he had uncovered buried forever? As dawn approached and rescue helicopters finally arrived to extract the team, Maria realized that her life as a simple Navy corpsman was over. Whatever she was about to discover about her father's research and the forces arrayed against her, there would be no going back to the relative safety of treating routine combat injuries. She was about to enter a world where the enemies were shadows and the stakes were far higher than any military mission she had ever been part of. 3 days after the extraction, Maria found herself in a sterile briefing room at Bagram Airfield, facing a collection of people whose presence made her deeply uncomfortable. The room contained not just her usual military commanders, but also individuals in civilian clothes, who introduced themselves with titles that told her nothing about their actual roles or affiliations. The man leading the briefing introduced himself simply as Director Walsh from the Defense Intelligence Agency. His pale blue eyes seemed to look right through her as he spread a series of photographs and documents across the metal table between them. Among them was the same photograph of her that had been found in the Afghan village, along with several others she had never seen before. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Walsh began, his voice carrying the kind of authority that suggested he was accustomed to being obeyed without question. "We need to discuss what your father discovered before his death, and why certain people are very interested in preventing that information from becoming public." Maria's throat felt dry as she stared at the photographs. Several showed her father, Dr. Carlos Rodriguez, meeting with people she didn't recognize in locations she had never seen. The timestamps indicated these meetings had taken place during his final months, when she had thought he was simply spending time at the local VA hospital receiving treatment. My father was a retired Army medic who worked part-time at a VA facility, she said carefully. He wasn't involved in anything that would interest the DIA. Walsh's expression didn't change as he slid another document across the table. This one was a photocopy of her father's handwritten notes, filled with medical terminology and what appeared to be patient identification numbers. At the bottom of the page, in her father's careful handwriting, were the words, "Project Nightingale. They're still using us as test subjects." The director watched her face as she read her father's notes. "Your father wasn't just treating patients at that VA facility, Staff Sergeant. He was investigating a medical research program that had been running for nearly 20 years. A program that was using veterans as unwilling test subjects for experimental treatments and pharmaceutical research." Maria's hands trembled slightly as she held the document. Her father had tried to tell her about his suspicions during his final weeks, but she had been so focused on his deteriorating health and her own upcoming deployment that she hadn't really listened. She had assumed his talk of conspiracies and cover-ups was just the result of pain medication and advancing illness. "Project Nightingale," Walsh continued, "was officially terminated in 2018, following a congressional investigation. However, your father discovered evidence that certain aspects of the program continued under different names and funding sources. He had managed to access medical records and treatment protocols that proved veterans were still being subjected to experimental procedures without their knowledge or consent." The revelation hit Maria like a physical blow. Her father had spent his final months trying to expose medical experiments being conducted on the very veterans he had dedicated his life to helping. And instead of supporting him, she had dismissed his concerns as paranoia. "The foreign operatives you encountered in Afghanistan," Walsh explained, "represent interests that have significant financial stakes in keeping Project Nightingale buried. The pharmaceutical companies involved in the research have billions of dollars in approved medications that could be pulled from the market if it became known they were initially tested on unwilling subjects." Maria looked up from her father's notes, her mind racing to process the implications. "You're telling me that someone sent a team of foreign operatives to kill me because my father discovered illegal medical experiments?" "Not just to kill you," Walsh corrected grimly. "The plan was to capture you alive and use you to locate any evidence your father might have hidden before his death. Your teammates weren't supposed to survive the ambush. You were meant to be the sole survivor, extracted by the enemy team for interrogation." The room fell silent as Maria absorbed this information. She thought back to the firefight in the village, remembering how the enemy fighters had seemed more focused on suppressing her teammates than actually eliminating them. At the time, she had attributed it to poor marksmanship or inadequate training, but now she realized it had been a deliberate strategy. Chief Morrison, who had been silent throughout the briefing, finally spoke up. "With respect, sir, how do we know any of this is true? How do we know you're not just another player in whatever game is being played here?" Walsh's expression remained neutral as he reached into his briefcase and produced a sealed evidence bag containing a small electronic device. This was removed from the foreign operative Staff Sergeant Rodriguez treated in the village. It's a data storage device containing detailed intelligence about American Special Operations personnel, including personal information about their families and backgrounds. He activated a laptop and connected the device, then turned the screen toward them. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she saw not just her own information displayed, but detailed files on dozens of other military personnel. The files contained home addresses, family member names, financial information, and even psychological profiles. "The people behind this operation have been gathering intelligence on American military personnel for years," Walsh explained. "They've been looking for individuals who might have access to information they want suppressed, or who could be used as leverage against family members who might pose a threat to their interests." Maria's mind immediately went to her younger brother Miguel, who was finishing his residency at a hospital in San Antonio. Was he in danger because of their father's discoveries? Had her own military service put her entire family at risk? As if reading her thoughts, Walsh slid another document across the table. Your brother is safe. We've had a protection detail monitoring him since we became aware of the threat. However, we believe there are others involved in this conspiracy, both within the medical establishment and potentially within our own government. The implications were staggering. Maria had joined the military to serve her country and help protect American lives. Now, she was learning that some of the very people she had sworn to serve might be involved in a conspiracy to harm American veterans. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. Walsh's expression became even more serious. "We believe your father hid evidence of Project Nightingale before his death. Evidence that could expose not just the illegal medical experiments, but also the network of people who have been working to cover them up. We need you to help us find that evidence." Maria thought back to her father's final weeks. He had been secretive about his activities, often leaving the house for hours at a time without explaining where he was going. She had assumed he was just trying to maintain some independence despite his declining health. But now she wondered if he had been hiding evidence somewhere. "He was always working in his garage during those last months," she said slowly. "I thought he was just tinkering with old car parts, but he was very protective of that space. He wouldn't let me or Miguel help him clean it out after he got too weak to work out there anymore." Walsh exchanged glances with the other officials in the room. "The garage was searched after your father's death, but nothing significant was found. However, your father was a military man who understood operational security. If he hid something, he would have done it in a way that only someone who knew him well would be able to figure out." The weight of responsibility settled on Maria's shoulders like a heavy pack. Not only was she being asked to help uncover evidence of crimes committed against American veterans, but she was also being told that her own life, and the lives of her family members, depended on finding whatever her father had hidden. Morrison leaned forward in his chair. "What kind of support are we talking about? If Staff Sergeant Rodriguez is going to be involved in this investigation, my team wants to be part of her security detail." "That's exactly what we were hoping you would say," Walsh replied. "This investigation will require a combination of military and intelligence assets. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez will need people she trusts watching her back, and your team has already proven they can handle the kind of threats we're dealing with." Over the next several hours, Walsh and his colleagues outlined a plan that would take Maria back to Texas to search for her father's hidden evidence. The mission would be disguised as compassionate leave to handle family affairs. But in reality, she would be working with a joint military intelligence task force to uncover one of the largest medical conspiracies in modern American history. As the briefing concluded and Maria prepared to leave for Texas, Morrison pulled her aside in the hallway outside the conference room. His weathered face showed concern she had rarely seen from him. "Doc, I want you to know that whatever we find down there, whatever your father got mixed up in, my team has your back. We've been through too much together for me to let you face this alone." Maria felt a surge of gratitude for the man who had become like a protective older brother to her over the course of multiple deployments. "I appreciate that, Chief. I'm scared about what we're going to find." "Fear keeps you alive in situations like this," Morrison replied. "Just remember that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who wear the same uniform you do. Trust your instincts, and don't trust anyone completely until we know who all the players are in this game." As Maria boarded the transport plane that would take her back to the United States, she stared out the window at the Afghan landscape disappearing below. She had thought she understood the nature of the enemies she was fighting, but now she realized the real battle was just beginning. Somewhere in her father's garage or hidden among his possessions was evidence that could expose decades of crimes against American veterans. Finding that evidence might be the most important mission of her life, but it also might be the most dangerous. The familiar heat of South Texas hit Maria like a wall as she stepped off the plane at San Antonio International Airport. After months in the dry desert air of Afghanistan, the humidity felt oppressive, but it also felt like home. Morrison and 2 other members of his team had accompanied her on the flight, officially listed as military personnel on compassionate leave, but actually serving as her security detail. The drive to her childhood home in the small border town of Eagle Pass took them through landscapes that brought back memories of weekend hunting trips with her father and late-night conversations about her future in medicine. Now, as she looked at the same rolling hills and mesquite trees, she wondered what secrets her father had hidden among these familiar surroundings. The house itself looked smaller than she remembered, its white stucco walls showing the wear of recent years when her father had been too ill to maintain the property properly. The garage sat separate from the main house, connected by a covered walkway that her father had built when she was in high school. As she stood in the driveway looking at the closed garage door, Maria realized she was about to discover whether her father had been a patriotic whistleblower or simply a sick man driven to paranoia by his illness. Morrison's team had already swept the property for surveillance devices and potential threats, but they had found nothing obvious. However, the very absence of any watchers made Morrison more nervous rather than less. In his experience, when dangerous people wanted to monitor someone, they were usually better at hiding their presence. The neighbors reported seeing people around the property several times since your father's death, Morrison told her as they approached the front door. Could have been family, friends, or estate lawyers, but given what we know now, I'm not taking anything for granted. Using the key she had kept all these years, Maria unlocked the front door and stepped into the house where she had grown up. Everything was exactly as she and Miguel had left it after their father's funeral. Family photographs still lined the mantelpiece, his reading glasses sat on the kitchen table next to a stack of medical journals, and his favorite coffee mug remained in the dish rack by the sink, but it was the garage that held her attention. Her father had always been protective of his workspace, treating it as a sanctuary where he could work on his various projects without interruption. During his final months, he had spent increasing amounts of time out there, often working late into the night, despite his weakening condition. The garage door stuck slightly as she lifted it, the metal rollers protesting with a squeal that echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Inside, the space looked much as it had during her childhood, filled with workbenches, tool cabinets, and the familiar smell of motor oil and metal shavings. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she noticed changes that hadn't been there during her last visit home. New filing cabinets had been installed along one wall, and a sophisticated computer system sat on a desk that hadn't existed before. Most striking was a large corkboard covered with photographs, documents, and colored string connecting various elements like something from a detective movie. At the center of the board was an organizational chart showing connections between pharmaceutical companies, government agencies, and individual names she didn't recognize. Morrison whistled softly as he examined the board. Your father wasn't just investigating medical experiments. He was mapping an entire network of people involved in covering them up. Maria moved closer to examine her father's work. The level of detail was extraordinary. He had somehow obtained financial records showing payments between pharmaceutical companies and various government officials. He had copies of internal memos discussing the need to suppress certain research findings. Most damaging of all, he had medical records showing veterans who had been enrolled in experimental treatment programs without their knowledge or consent. How did he get access to all of this? She wondered aloud. The answer came from an unexpected source. As she was examining one of the filing cabinets, she noticed a small note taped to the inside of the drawer, written in her father's distinctive handwriting. Maria, if you're reading this, I'm probably gone. The combination to the safe is your mother's birthday followed by the year we were married. Everything you need is inside. Trust no one in uniform until you know who the real enemies are. Love, Papa. Maria's eyes filled with tears as she read her father's final message. Even in his illness and approaching death, he had been thinking about protecting her and ensuring that his discoveries wouldn't die with him. She quickly calculated the combination and located the safe hidden behind a false panel in one of the workbenches. Inside the safe was a collection of documents that made everything else they had found look insignificant. Her father had somehow obtained signed confessions from pharmaceutical company executives admitting to using veterans as test subjects. He had recorded conversations with VA officials discussing how to suppress adverse reaction reports. Most shocking of all, he had evidence that some veterans had died as a direct result of experimental treatments, and their deaths had been covered up by falsifying medical records. But the most disturbing discovery was a list of names that included several high-ranking military officers and government officials who had been receiving payments from pharmaceutical companies in exchange for their cooperation in covering up Project Nightingale. Some of the names were people Maria recognized from her own military career, including officers who had been involved in approving her assignments and security clearances. Morrison's expression grew increasingly grim as he reviewed the documents. Doc, this goes way higher than we thought. Some of these people have access to classified military operations. They would have known about our mission in Afghanistan before we ever left base. The implications were terrifying. Maria realized that her father's investigation had uncovered not just medical crimes, but a corruption network that extended into the highest levels of the military and government. The foreign operatives in Afghanistan hadn't been acting independently. They had been hired by Americans who were willing to sacrifice military personnel to protect their secrets. As they continued examining her father's evidence, Maria's phone rang. The caller ID showed her brother Miguel's number. But, when she answered, the voice on the other end was unfamiliar. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you have something that belongs to us. If you want to see your brother alive again, you'll bring all of your father's research to the coordinates we're about to send you. You have 2 hours." The line went dead before she could respond. Within seconds, her phone chimed with a text message containing GPS coordinates for a location about 30 miles outside of town. Morrison was already on his radio calling for backup support when Maria's phone rang again. This time it was Miguel's voice, strained but recognizable. "Maria, I'm okay for now, but these people are serious. They know everything about Dad's research. They know about the safe in the garage. They said if you don't bring everything to them, they'll kill me and then come after you anyway." Morrison grabbed the phone from her hand. "Miguel, this is Chief Morrison. With your sister's unit. How many people are holding you? What can you see around you?" "I think there are 4 or 5 of them," Miguel replied quickly. "We're in some kind of warehouse or large building. I can hear traffic outside, but I can't see anything. They're all Americans, Chief. These aren't foreign terrorists or anything like that." This confirmed Morrison's worst fears. The conspiracy involved American citizens, possibly including government officials, who were willing to kidnap and murder American citizens to protect their secrets. The safe extraction protocols he would normally follow in a hostage situation couldn't be applied when the hostage takers might include people with access to official resources and intelligence. "We're going to get you out," Morrison told Miguel. "But I need you to stay calm and try to remember anything you can about how you got there or what these people have said." After ending the call, Morrison turned to his team members. "This changes everything. We're not just dealing with criminals anymore. We're dealing with traitors who have access to official resources and intelligence capabilities." Maria felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. Her father had died trying to expose crimes committed against American veterans, and now her brother was paying the price for her father's courage. But she also realized that if she simply turned over all the evidence to save Miguel, thousands of other veterans who had been victimized would never receive justice. "We have to find a way to save Miguel without giving up the evidence," she said firmly. "There has to be copies made before we do anything." Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's exactly what your father would have wanted. He spent months gathering this evidence because he knew other veterans needed justice. We're not going to let his sacrifice be meaningless." Working quickly, they photographed every document, copied every computer file, and created multiple backup sets of all the evidence. Morrison's team members used their military communications equipment to transmit copies to Director Walsh and other trusted contacts in the intelligence community. But as they prepared to leave for the meeting with Miguel's kidnappers, Maria discovered one final surprise her father had left for her. Hidden in the bottom of the safe was a small recording device containing audio files of conversations he had secretly recorded during his investigation. The voices on the recordings included some of the most powerful people in American medicine and government, discussing in explicit detail how they planned to silence anyone who threatened to expose Project Nightingale. The final recording was her father speaking directly to her. His voice was weak but determined as he explained his motivation for risking everything to expose the truth. "Maria, if you're hearing this, it means I didn't live to see justice done for the veterans who were used as guinea pigs by people they trusted with their lives. These men and women served their country with honor, and in return, they were poisoned and experimented on by the very government they had sworn to protect. I couldn't stand by and let that continue, even if it cost me my life. Now that responsibility falls to you. Don't let them die in vain." As Maria listened to her father's final words, she felt a strength and determination she had never experienced before. She was no longer just a Navy corpsman or even a member of an elite special operations team. She had become the guardian of evidence that could expose one of the worst betrayals in American military history, and she was prepared to risk everything to ensure that justice was finally served. Morrison's team loaded their equipment and weapons as they prepared to face whatever trap awaited them at the coordinates Miguel's kidnappers had provided. They knew they were probably walking into an ambush, but they also knew that Maria's brother was counting on them, and thousands of victimized veterans were depending on the evidence they carried. The drive toward the meeting location took them through increasingly isolated countryside as the sun began to set over the Texas hills. As they approached the coordinates, Morrison's tactical experience told him they were heading into a situation where victory would require not just courage and skill, but also the kind of moral clarity that had driven Maria's father to risk everything for the truth. The final confrontation was about to begin, and the outcome would determine whether decades of crimes against American veterans would finally be exposed, or whether the conspiracy would succeed in burying the truth forever, along with anyone who threatened to reveal it.